Welcome to the new year, everyone. And wouldn't you know it, the true crime stories keep on rolling in from all around the world. Well, thanks so much for tuning in today. Here are the strange and scary mysteries of the month for January 2026. Number 5. Vanished on Christmas Eve.
There is a massive search underway in Texas right now for 19-year-old Camila Mendoza Olmos, who disappeared almost a week ago from her home on the morning of Christmas Eve.
It was early on the morning of December 24th, 2025, in northwest Bexar County, Texas, a community gearing up for the holiday swing. There were a lot of people getting excited to spend some time with family and friends. The 19-year-old college student Camila Olmos stepped out of her family's home that day and then disappeared without a trace. She was last seen just before 7 a.m., captured on her family's ring camera, standing outside the home on Caspian Spring Road, just north of San Antonio. That footage showed her leaning into her vehicle momentarily, as if to retrieve something, and then walking off, her path fading into the quiet neighborhood streets. She was known to work out regularly, but wasn't dressed in any sort of jogging outfit, just regular clothes, and that was really the first sign that something here wasn't right. Her family woke up later that morning to find their daughter gone, and then they discovered her phone and iPad had been left behind, belongings that under ordinary circumstances would have stayed with her. At first, her family thought she probably went out for exercise, except then hours passed by, plus it was Christmas Eve, still no sign of her. So they started searching. And after a while, the deputies with the Bexar County Sheriff's Office joined in, and then so did neighbors and friends. And days passed by and additional footage surfaced from a passing vehicle's dash cam, believed to show Camila walking along Wild Horse Parkway, several blocks from her home. But that was the last sighting, and it only broadened the search from there. Over the next several days, volunteers, K-9 units, and drones searched every inch of nearby woods and brush. And from there, this case drew widespread attention across the country, especially because of how suddenly and quietly Camila had vanished. Investigators treated her disappearance as potentially dangerous, including the possibility of abduction, even though there was no evidence just yet. And then finally, 7 days later, on December 30th, Camila's disappearance reached a tragic conclusion. She was found deceased in a field not too far from her home. A gun lay next to her, and she died from a single shot. And the authorities stated there was no evidence of foul play. It's believed when she went to her vehicle before walking off that day, well, the gun is what she was grabbing. Camila was still in her teenage years, balancing college and everyday routines. After her discovery, the authorities stated that she had been experiencing emotional distress, though there was no public record of a formal diagnosis, and no prior incidents were detailed publicly. For many people, the holiday season brings connection, relief, and celebration, but for others, it can quietly amplify pressure, expectations, loneliness, or internal struggles that aren't always visible from the outside. And because so much of that weight is carried privately, the warning signs aren't always obvious, even to the people closest by. In Camila's case, nothing about that Christmas Eve morning suggested what would follow. There were no messages explaining her thoughts and no clear destination, just a short walk away from home that ended 6 days later in a tragic way. Number 4. Lost Trail of Dan Davis.
He's very creature of habit, so him going missing is the last thing anybody would have ever expected of him.
2 nights before Thanksgiving, on November 25th, 2025, 59-year-old Daniel Davis III finished his shift at the Bourbon Street Bar in Marionette Park, a beloved venue on Chicago's South Side. It's where he'd worked for over 2 decades. All the regulars knew him simply as Dan, the guy who was there with a smile and always ready to refill your glass. That night, he walked out of that bar, and by the next evening, those familiar steps became the beginning of a search that still hasn't found any answers, or Dan himself. So, let's take it back and see what happened. Now, earlier that evening, Dan had actually been involved in what's been described as a minor car crash near 119th Street in Avers. He refused medical attention at the scene, insisting he was fine, and after that, a Cook County Sheriff's deputy drove him back to Bourbon Street so he could return to work. Around 1:15 a.m. on November 25th, surveillance video captured him leaving the venue on foot. In the clip, he seemed steady, but over the next hours, his movements would grow harder to explain. In the hours that followed, a patchwork of private and security cameras picked up glimpses of him that painted a concerning picture. Around 7:30 a.m., footage allegedly showed him walking through a yard and stumbling on a sidewalk near Des Plaines and Gregory, as if struggling to navigate simple obstacles. Later in the afternoon, a different camera captured him on Old Western Avenue, nearby Blue Island. Police say he appeared confused and disoriented in some of those clips. On the evening of November 26th, a camera at St. Donatus Church on South Union Street caught what remains the last confirmed image of the man. He was seen there just before 6:30 p.m., walking away from the church in the fading light. After that, there have been no verified sightings. Within hours of his disappearance, Daniel's family reported him missing to the Chicago PD, and a missing person alert was issued. Investigators describe him as a white man with brown eyes, short gray hair, about 5'8", and 170 pounds. At the time, he was believed to have been wearing his black Harley-Davidson jacket, a red sweatshirt, black jeans, and a black baseball cap. Dan is a family man and a reliable person, which is why his story is so unsettling. Described by friends and family as steady and social, the footage of him walking is hard for his family to watch because he appears to be having trouble with his balance and movement. His daughter believes it stems from the crash just hours earlier. She says that he probably suffered some kind of medical episode, perhaps a stroke or internal head injury. Despite a widespread search effort, the trail in locating Dan has gone cold as of right now. There were unconfirmed reports of possible sightings, but none were publicly verified by police, and obviously it didn't lead to finding him. Dan's cell phone and financial accounts went quiet shortly after the day he vanished, leaving only the sequence of videos and the filled-in gaps from cameras scattered around the south suburbs. The family's online outreach, including a Find Dan Davis Facebook page that's drawn thousands of followers, has helped keep the case in public view, but no definitive breakthrough has emerged. Some volunteers examined maps for possible paths. Others scoured forested lots and abandoned rail yards. Still, no trace that leads conclusively to where Daniel went next has been found. Today, law enforcement continues to list Dan as missing and potentially in need of medical assistance. If anyone believes they have seen Daniel Davis III or has information about his whereabouts, don't delay reporting it, even if you aren't sure. Either call 911 or contact the Chicago PD's Missing Persons Unit. Number 3, footsteps in the alley.
It's the ex-husband. That's who cops say murdered a young dentist and his wife in their home. One critical clue led authorities to him. The shocking news breaking as friends...
Just before dawn on December 30th, 2025, something about a quiet Columbus, Ohio neighborhood began to feel off. A routine that rarely broke was suddenly interrupted, and the absence was enough to send people looking for answers. That morning, family members and colleagues of 37-year-old Dr. Spencer Tepe grew anxious when he didn't appear at his dental practice on time. Spencer took his work very seriously and had a reputation for punctuality and dedication, so his absence was very unlike him. Calls and texts followed after that, sent out to both him and his wife, 39-year-old Monique, asking where he might be, but all those went unanswered. So, the police then got an urgent call from a friend asking them if they could please go and do a wellness check at their home. Officers arrived at the couple's residence, located in the Winland Park neighborhood, and knocked on the front door. Still no response. They then forced their way in, and the scene that greeted them was distressing, to say the least. Both Spencer and Monique were found shot dead, while their two young children, later described only as being toddlers, were physically unharmed but crying out nearby. Investigators immediately treated the scene as a double homicide, noting that there were no obvious signs of forced entry and that no firearm was recovered at the scene. The absence of forced entry was particularly important because it suggested either a familiarity between the victim and assailant, or a stealth and precise operation that left little physical trace. So, someone who knew them or a pro. The couple were believed to have been killed sometime between 2 and 5 a.m., deep in the hours of a winter night when most of the neighborhood would have been asleep. Amid those early hours, security cameras in the area may have just captured the assailant. They recorded an unidentified person walking through a nearby alleyway during that time frame, and the figure, dressed in a dark hooded jacket with lighter colored pants, moved with no obvious urgency, simply passing through the frame as if they hadn't a care in the world. And Columbus police released the surveillance video to us, the public, calling the figure a person of interest in connection to the murders. And they urge anyone who recognizes the individual or has information to come and step forward. Law enforcement so far has followed up on numerous tips from the community in the days that followed, but as of early January 2026, no arrests have been made and the person in the footage has not been identified. For a couple described by neighbors and family as devoted parents and warm, active members of their town, the lack of a clear motive, combined with the absence of forced entry, raises troubling questions. And what brought someone to the Tepe home in the dead of night just after the holidays? Did the person in the alley footage know exactly what they were doing and why? Or was the family chosen at random? While investigators have not released all the information about this case, we do know that nothing was stolen from the Tepe house, so burglary wasn't the motive. And they are still working to reconstruct a basic timeline of the night, how long the killer may have been inside the house, whether the children had any interaction with the intruder, and what, if anything, the couple might have heard or seen before they were shot. Autopsy results and forensic analysis are still pending as of the making of this episode. In the days after the tragedy, friends and extended family established a GoFundMe campaign to support the couple's children, which quickly raised well over $150,000 as the community rallied in shock and grief. But unlike many investigations that culminate in a suspect's name or a clear motive, this one hovers in that unsettled space where evidence exists but doesn't align neatly with explanation. For now, the Columbus Police Homicide Unit continues to pursue leads, speak with anyone who might have seen something on that long night, and hope that someone, somewhere, may recognize the figure in that footage. Number 2, what was meant to stay buried.
57 years of talk and people saying stuff. I was always told that don't ask. So I'm like, I stopped asking.
In the early 1960s, the Carroll family lived a modest life out in Massapequa, New York on Long Island. George Carroll was a Korean War vet, a husband, and the father of 4 children. He worked steadily and came home at the end of the day and was part of the routines that held the household together. To his kids, he was simply dad, present, reliable, and expected to be there the next morning. And then one day in 1963, George walked out of the house and never came back. Dorothy Carroll, his wife, told the children that their father had gone out to buy some cigarettes, when he didn't return, the explanation slowly shifted. Over time, the story became that George had abandoned the family, and that he chose to leave and just never looked back. No missing persons report was ever filed, so no police search followed. And for the children, questions were quietly discouraged, and Dorothy always gave vague answers. And life just kept moving forward like that. Years passed by, and Dorothy eventually remarried. The man who moved into their lives was Richard Duress, a handyman who had worked around the Carroll home even before George disappeared. That transition happened quickly, and for the children, it created confusion they didn't yet have the language to process. As the Carroll kids grew up, the mystery of their father's disappearance stayed unresolved. Some wondered if he'd started a new life, others suspected something darker. But without evidence, and with silence inside the family, speculation was all they had. Decades later, George's youngest son, Mike, found himself drawn back into the story. Now, Mike had become a nurse, and at one point in his career, he cared for an older patient who turned out to be someone he didn't even know existed, his own uncle, George Carroll's brother. During their brief time together in a hospital where Mike was randomly assigned to this man, the uncle told Mike something that shook him. That his family never believed George had abandoned his children. Well, they believed he had been murdered. That statement reframed everything Mike thought he knew. Around the same time, Mike purchased his mother's old house because she was having trouble keeping up with the payments. This is the same house she vowed never to leave, and the same home where his father had vanished decades earlier. He moved in, lived there, and walked the same floors without knowing what questions might be buried beneath them. Mike shared what he'd learned with his siblings, including his sister Jean, and together they began revisiting memories they had once pushed aside. But one detail stood out. Shortly after their father disappeared, there had been major work done in the basement. At the time, it meant nothing. Years later, though, it felt impossible to ignore. Eventually, Jean convinced Mike to visit a psychic, something he initially dismissed, but the session left him unsettled. And this psychic claimed George had never left at all. And she said he'd been murdered, and that his body was buried beneath the house. Mike didn't take the claim at face value, but the idea was something he couldn't shake. After months of consideration, research, and hesitation, Mike decided to investigate himself. With the help of his sons and specialists using ground-penetrating radar, he focused on a section of the basement floor that showed signs of disturbance inconsistent with the rest of the foundation. It would take many months, but eventually they found a cinder block-looking tomb buried 8 feet down. It had nothing to do with the structure of the house, but somebody had certainly made it. When they broke through the concrete, there they found human remains. Now, this happened in 2017. George had gone missing in 1963. So for 54 years, he had been down there the entire time. Police were called in, and a forensic analysis confirmed that the remains belonged to George Carroll, and his death was ruled a homicide due to blunt force trauma to the head. Now, by then, Richard Duress, the man who had married Dorothy after George disappeared, was already dead, as was Dorothy herself, so any questions the kids had could not be answered. All they could do was speculate. Was it Mom all along? Did Richard do it? Or was it a joint effort? For the Carroll children, the discovery didn't erase the past, but it ended the lie that had shaped their lives. Their father hadn't walked away. He had been taken from them, and the truth had been hidden in plain sight for decades. Number 1. Who's the real killer? No one disputes that Eunice Whitman was murdered. What's been disputed for nearly a decade, though, is whether the system ever came close to holding the right person accountable. Eunice was 23 years old back in 2015 and living in Bethel, a small western Alaskan community. She lived there all her life. And in a place like this, it doesn't take long for people to notice when someone hasn't checked in or hasn't shown up where they're expected. When Eunice didn't come home one night in May of that year, well, the townsfolk began asking questions. And by morning, those questions turned into something else entirely. Her body was discovered on a wooden boardwalk right near the center of town, and she had been stabbed multiple times. And this attack was violent and carried out in a public place where someone would inevitably find her. Whoever did it didn't care, so either they were totally crazy in their head or there was some personal rage behind it. Blinded by the fury, and they didn't care if they got caught. Now, since everyone knew everyone here, they cut out crazy for the most part. And from the start, investigators believed the killer knew Eunice, and they moved fast to name a suspect. Within 24 hours, police arrested her boyfriend, Justin Paul, and charged him with murder. The case appeared straightforward. The prosecutors said evidence tied him to her and the crime, and the community was told justice was already in motion. But then, nothing happened. Paul stayed in jail as the case stalled. Hearings were delayed, trial dates came and went. Evidence that had been described as strong at the start began to weaken under scrutiny. Forensic testing showed that blood prosecutors had pointed to did not belong to Eunice. Other claims failed to hold up in court filings as well. All the while, though, Paul remained behind bars, and the years passed by. By the time the prosecutors finally gave in and acknowledged they could not move forward, Justin had spent nearly 7 years in custody without a trial, longer than many people serve after a conviction. In 2022, the charges were dropped completely and Paul was released. There was never any apology, no verdict, and no alternate suspect announced. And Eunice Whitman's murder was still unsolved. For her family, the collapse of the case was devastating in a different way because not only was her killer still unknown, but the system had consumed years chasing an answer that couldn't stand up to evidence, while leaving everything else untouched. Everything went cold, and after all that time, the idea of digging back into the case from square one was a hard pill to swallow. For a long time after that, the case sat quietly, not officially closed, just unmoving. And then, in late December 2025, something changed. Alaska officials confirmed that Eunice's case was being actively reviewed again, this time by the state's Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons Unit, a team created specifically to re-examine cases where investigators failed, stalled, or went off course. There was no announcement of new evidence or suspect, just confirmation that the case was no longer being left where it broke down. As of now, Whitman's murder remains unsolved, and for the first time in years, the focus is no longer on defending what went wrong, it's on whether anything meaningful can still be done. So they were the strange and scary mysteries of the month for January 2026. I hope you all enjoyed the episode. If you did, please do subscribe so you don't miss out. It also helps to keep us moving along here. And thanks so much for tuning in. Y'all stay safe out there, and I'll see you over in the next one.